Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar of the outcome harvesting community. It's good to see you all. My name is Helene and I will be your moderator today. I'm an independent consultant based in Belgium, and I've been working with outcome harvesting since its very beginning. I'm also one of the outcome harvesting community facilitators together with Connie Hoiting and Carmen Wilson-Grau. Carmen, if you can also introduce yourself.
Thank you, Hula. Hi, everyone. My name is Carmen Wilson-Grau. As Hula mentioned, one of the outcome harvesting community facilitators, also an independent consultant, and I'm based in Guatemala in Central America.
Great, thanks. And then we also just have Connie with us. Connie, I know you come from another meeting, and I'm going to put you right on the spot if you could just introduce yourself.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Connie Hoiting. I'm an independent consultant based in the Netherlands, and I'm also part of the community facilitators of the outcome harvesting community. Hi
Great.
everybody.
Thanks, Connie. So if you haven't done so yet, you're welcome to join our community through the forum page of our website. Carmen, maybe you can paste the link to the website in the chat for everyone. Um, Some practicalities. So as we go, please keep yourself muted. And during the presentations, it's also nice if you can keep your cameras off so that we can focus on our presenters. But afterwards, if we go into the discussion, it would actually be great if you turn your cameras on so we can see each other. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will be shared in the community through an email and will also be on our website after the webinar. So do check our website. You will also find the slides there and the recording. So if you go to that page, you will see that we had many interesting webinars already. And we know that there are many more great outcome harvesting stories to be told. So if you feel like you would like to present a webinar as well, then do write to us and you can maybe be in one of the next webinars. Now, today's webinar is about outcome harvesting as a feminist and localized M&E approach. And that's a discussion that's going on in the whole evaluation field. So something that's also relevant for outcome harvesting. So gender in M&E used to be focused on gender sensitivity and was often reduced to counting how many women participated. But it's now shifting to really feminist M&E and gender transformative changes and also really looking at power structures in programs and M&E. So it's good to also reflect for outcome harvesting what this means. Outcome harvesting is a participatory and people-centered approach, so it may have some of these elements already, but even if that's the case, it's not necessarily common practice, or it might pose challenges of how to really implement it. So I'm excited to introduce today's speakers, Helene, Bach and Waqas Naeem, and they, when they start presenting, can also say something more about themselves, but they both work for the International Media Support Organization. And so they will take us through this subject and explain more about what it means. And so this is based on their experience in their Pakistan project. They will both present for about 30 minutes altogether, and after that we will move to questions. If you have any questions whenever they come up, you can put them in the chat, and we will take them at the end of the presentations. So having said that, let's move to Waqas, who will start presenting. Let me just stop the screen sharing, and then Waqas, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Hule, Connie, and Carmen, and the Outcome Harvesting Community webinar series for having us. Like Hule mentioned, I'm Waqas Naeem. I'm a program officer and Asia M&E advisor at International Media Support, and I'll be joined by my colleague Helene Bach. So we'll have short inputs, and we hope that we'll have plenty of time at the end for question and answers. If you just allow me a few seconds, I'll share my screen. And I hope it's visible now and I'm audible to all. We'll be presenting on the use of outcome harvesting as a feminist and localized MEL approach by particularly sharing lessons and learning from a pilot project that is currently being implemented in Pakistan. Before we share the details of the pilot project, just a quick word about our organization. International Media Support, or IMS, is an international NGO that works in 25 countries around the world to support independent public interest media, the safety of journalists, and the enabling legal and policy environment for freedom of expression. In Asia, we have programs in 7 countries, including in Pakistan, where I'm based. The pilot project that forms the basis of our talk today is part of a broader multi-year project on strengthening participatory MEL being implemented by IMS and 2 other Danish NGOs. The overall project is funded by Global Focus, which some of you might be familiar with, is an umbrella organization that supports civil society organizations in Denmark. The IMS component of this overall project was to use and develop outcome harvesting with local participation to identify transformative changes related to gender equality in media systems. A bit of context about why the IMS component addresses localization and a feminist approach. IMS has always had a focus on gender as a cross-cutting theme in our media development work, especially related to the safety of women journalists. And through an institutional gender equality strategy, we have in the past explored efforts to integrate a more intersectional feminist approach in our media related work, and also to evaluate how our programs in various countries around the world rate on a gender sensitivity scale in which the maximum or ideal rating is gender transformative, which would mean that ideally our work would address the root causes and structural inequalities that create gender discrimination within the media sector. Having said that, we also acknowledge that we are not experts on feminist evaluation, and we approached this part of the pilot project with utmost humility and a critical acknowledgement of our Western gaze, and in some cases, in my case particularly, the male gaze as well. Secondly, localization is a key focus of the current institutional strategy at IMS, under which we use a trust-based approach of working with local media and civil society organizations in the countries where we operate. And so we were also interested in building localization into our MEL practices, especially looking at how the capacities of our local partners can be improved when it comes to monitoring and evaluation. For the pilot project, Pakistan was selected as the country for implementation because in the past few years, the Pakistan program has conducted a gender audit and executed a gender action plan. So our partner organizations and our beneficiaries in the country were already familiar with IMS's efforts, and we felt it would be a good opportunity to get them to use outcome harvesting to examine it further. The project objectives for the pilot MEL project follow from the background. We wanted to test outcome harvesting as a participatory, localized, and feminist method to identify gender-related changes. But for the pilot specifically, we also included a capacity building component because we found out early on that the partners, the organizations that we would be working on this with in the country had no prior experience of using outcome harvesting. So we had conversations with them, and we also built in this capacity building and also a dialogue to find out how partners and beneficiaries define meaningful participation in the MEL process for themselves. I won't go into the details of this, but you can scan the QR code to read the detailed concept note for our pilot project. And these slides will also be shared as a resource on the Outcome Harvesting Community website. So you'll be able to use them after the webinar as well. So when it came to the feminist part of this pilot project, we felt that we needed to do a bit of reading ourselves. So in order to test outcome harvesting from a feminist perspective, we used a literature review to arrive at 4 principles for our own feminist MEL approach. These principles are to examine structural inequalities and power relations, to ensure inclusion in creation and the use of knowledge, to acknowledge the complexity of change and the different levels of accountability when it comes to results, and also to focus on human rights and diversity, equity, and inclusion. For each of these four principles, we operationalize them with a description and then unpack them using a set of practical guiding questions related to the media development context. So, for example, the first principle takes into account that gender discrimination is often structural and systemic, and we cannot have a feminist evaluation without addressing the power structures and power relations that create and, in some cases, perpetuate gender inequalities. The guiding questions for this first principle included exploring the decision making power dynamics between IMS and its partners, between the partners and their beneficiaries, and then in some cases also within social actors and beneficiary structures. For example, how do our interventions affect the rights of women journalists who are members of, say, a male dominated press club or a male dominated trade union of journalists? We do not have time to go into the details of each principle and all the questions, but again, there's a QR code on your screens. You can scan it to read in detail the principles and their underlying questions. And we'll be happy to field questions at the end or after the webinar as well. In terms of laying out the activities of this outcome harvesting exercise, as I mentioned previously as well, we included a capacity building training for partners. It was their first time experiencing outcome harvesting. So we had them go through training and orientation, and their response was really encouraging. They could see that in a fragile context such as ours, outcome harvesting could be a very good alternative, and in fact, maybe perhaps the first option instead of more linear MEL methods. And then after, based on the discussions with them, we also divided the actual outcome harvest workshop that we intended to do into two parts so as to ease them into learning the method more fully. And in between those two harvest exercises or harvest workshops, we had regular correspondence with them, which was on an ongoing basis. For the harvest design, we adopted a completely collaborative approach where we facilitated partner staff through a series of in-person and online dialogues to identify the social actors for the programs, the users and users of the harvest, and the M&E questions. You can see the users and users diagram on the screen. The primary users were the partners themselves. I should mention here that we had two partner organizations, which were both civil society organizations, Freedom Network and Irada. And we also included a beneficiary organization, which is a volunteer collective of female journalists. It's called the Women Journalists Association. The most difficulty that we faced was in setting the M&E questions. This was also because the partner organizations and the beneficiary organization had very little internal capacity for MEL because these are small teams with few staff members and not a lot of internal expertise when it comes to monitoring and evaluation. So in some cases, we had to use prompts to help them brainstorm the monitoring and evaluation questions. For example, we used the prompt, would you like to know how or who changed as a result of your intervention, to arrive at the M&E question related to social actors. So we finally agreed on the four M&E questions that you see on your screen. The first M&E question deals with social actors, the second with the actual outcomes and how they relate with the three strategic areas of the work IMS does. For example, one of our strategic areas is the safety of journalists. The third question is about interpreting the direction and nature of the results to see if they are positively contributing to gender transformative changes or not. And the fourth is a self-reflection of sorts of how the program activities are contributing to the outcomes. So we organized the first mini harvest as a 2-day workshop in which 1 day was fully dedicated to the first three steps of the outcome harvesting process. So reviewing the harvest design, reviewing the desk research, and then formulating the outcomes. And we gave the participants a wide berth so they could look at the past 4 years of program implementation to identify outcomes and changes. This was also a request from the partners because they felt a little nervous, a little pressured that if we limited it limited to 1 year only, they wouldn't have enough results related to gender sensitivity. So in this first harvest exercise, they were able to identify 46 outcomes altogether, out of which 22 were specifically related to gender. And most of the gender-related outcomes were contributed by the beneficiary organization, the Women Journalists Association, because they directly work with women journalists and they felt they had a stronger focus on it. We also dedicated 1 day of this 2-day exercise on simply speaking with the partners about feminist MEL, about gender responsive project cycle management, because they were also interested in the process that leads to results. So how programs are planned, designed, budgeted, and implemented. And we also spoke about sort of case studies related to PASIA practices. Just two quick examples from the gender-related outcomes that we identified. In the first case, the partners identified that their program policy advocacy helped introduce a key amendment in a draft bill on the safety of journalists. The bill, which is now enacted into law, called for the establishment of a commission at the national level for the protection of journalists. But the composition of the commission in its original form in the draft bill had only included office bearers of the representative bodies of journalists. And from our experience of working in Pakistan, we know that these office bearer positions or leadership positions at the representative associations of journalists are almost always occupied by male journalists. So there was fear that the commission would have no female members. And so our partners advocated for a clause to be added to the draft bill that would ensure that at least 3 women members would be included in the commission. And the Human Rights Ministry actually listened to their advocacy and made sure that the law now reflects that change. In the second outcome, our program supported news content production on the rights of religious minorities in Pakistan. And a key theme that organically emerged from the supported content was the adverse impact of existing family laws in the country on non-Muslim communities, especially Hindus and Christians, because they're not covered by Muslim family laws. And we are a Muslim majority country, so the family laws are mostly derived from Islamic jurisprudence. So this leaves the Hindu and Christian communities in terms of their marriages and divorces to be governed by a British colonial law that dates back to the year 1872, when the minimum age of marriage for girls and boys was 13 and 16 years, respectively. So the program supported content, especially on legal reforms related to family law, was used by advocacy groups to claim their rights, and the advocacy efforts related to the family laws actually resulted in legal reforms in the past year, in 2024, where now the age of marriage for Christian men and women is raised to 18 years minimum. During the Harvest workshop, we also encouraged the participants to identify any negative impact or side effects on gender equality from the program activities. For this, we built a separate session in the Harvest workshop and developed worksheets with a focus on negative outcomes and got the participants to work in groups to think about any unintended consequences of their work. So one example that you can see on your screens right now is a side effect of the advocacy of the beneficiary organization, the Women Journalists Association. They were trying to set up a caucus of women journalists at the National Press Club in Islamabad, which is the federal capital of Pakistan. This was based on an idea that we have seen in practice in our federal and provincial legislatures, where there are women's parliamentary caucuses whose members are women members of parliament, and they used those caucuses to discuss laws and policies related to gender and other issues. This idea was well received by the press club, but then the male leadership usurped it and unilaterally selected the members of the caucus that they had formed. And reportedly, they also included non-press club members into the caucus who were women, but are allegedly the relatives and friends of the male leadership. So they also made no mechanism for existing women members from the press club to become members of this new caucus, thereby excluding the actual female journalists from the forum. So according to our beneficiary organization, it was a well-intentioned advocacy measure that was designed to or intended to bring more representation and voice to the female journalists, but it led to more discrimination so far. And finally, in terms of the learning from the pilot project so far, we've noted that, and we learned this early on when we were doing our concept note, that outcome harvesting is often seen as inherently as a feminist method because of its participatory nature. But through our experience, we feel it can be further localized and the feminist aspect can be made further pronounced by first of all showing intent through the harvest design. So we did that in our pilot project by using the M&E questions, but we also understand that we had this luxury and other evaluations might not. So in that case, adopting the feminist principles and unpacking them into guiding questions can be helpful. Two ways we feel that can be done is through ensuring inclusion and providing brave spaces that address the hierarchies of power. Throughout our experience so far, we've heard from our harvest participants and also from the evaluation community of practice at the European Evaluation Society conference in Italy last year that power imbalances are perhaps the most critical factor for creating and perpetuating gender inequality and suppressing diverse voices in measuring the impact of any development intervention. It's not limited to gender alone. It can affect any form of inclusion, equity, and diversity. So we think it then puts more responsibility on the shoulders of the outcome harvesting facilitator to identify these power dynamics perhaps beforehand, create intent among participants to be open to understand rather than be defensive or judgmental about the perspectives that they hear about during the harvest process, and also provide brave spaces where participants can express their critical perspectives without fear of negative consequences in their workplaces or in the partner beneficiary relationships. This is obviously easier said than done. In the pilot, we tried to do this by sometimes breaking into smaller groups where program staff could speak their minds openly without the executives or senior management being present, and then we as facilitators taking those notes to the senior management in a setting where we could leverage our external status to communicate those concerns. Since the pilot is still ongoing and will be finished next month, we are trying to refine some of these insights and suggest further action steps related to them so that evaluators can use them practically. And we'll hopefully put all of these findings together in a learning resource, which my colleague Helene Bach will speak about more in her talk to follow. I will stop here and pass the floor to Helene. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Waqas, for that interesting presentation. Over to you, Helene. And do feel free to, meanwhile, put your questions in the chat so we can take them after the presentations. So keep them coming in the chat so you don't forget them. Okay, Helene.
Yes, and you can see my screen now with the slide?
Yes.
Yes, great, thanks. Just a brief presentation. My name is Helene Bach. I'm the institutional M&E advisor with the international media support, and I have had the pleasure to do this pilot together with Waqas. I have been using outcome harvesting since 2007 as part of a mixed method monitoring approach, first with ActionAid and now with the international media support. And what I will be talking a bit about is more like how this feminist lens is then applied on the outcome harvesting methodology as such. And this is just a brief reminder for all of us. I guess you all know the 6 steps and the key principles. So I will not go into that, but to share with you like how, based on the learnings that Waqas shared, what we will tweak using a feminist lens. In step 2, it's has the terminology formulate outcomes and support sources to identify outcomes, where with a feminist lens, the the sources can sound a bit extracting, like extracting knowledge, and more like a top-down approach, extracting knowledge from sources. It's more empowering and creating agency and putting those closest to the results at the center of the process by using this instead of sourcing, engaging owners of results, because that's actually what it is. It's the people who owns the results. Then we discussed a little bit on step 4, the substantiation, and that was also part of, we shared this, our initial findings at the EES conference, where we also got a lot of very useful input. And one of the things that were discussed, that was this with the substantiation, where with the feminist lens, the focus should more be on learning, where substantiation can sound a little bit of a control regime more than mutual learning and mutual accountability, where it's more the role of the consultant or the M&E coordinator to facilitate this learning, as Waqas said, instead of controlling and substantiating and validating. So these are our suggested changes to the steps as such. And of course, this is a feminist lens. It's not suggesting that outcome harvesting as such, the wording should be changed, but when really using outcome harvesting in a localized feminist approach, maybe these words would capture it better. Then we went into like how to apply the different steps and what to pay attention to. Just wrapping up and really at a more methodological level, taking some of the things Waqas just described. This with the power relations throughout the process, especially, of course, in the design of the harvest, but throughout the process, the feminist principles. Include M&E questions on gender equality and gender transformative changes. That also a way to make outcome harvesting a feminist M&E tool. Then on the substantiation/learning, make sure to include have a gender balance when you also engage external stakeholders involved in this learning. On the harvest and the ping pong, to value diverse voices over maybe well-formulated outcomes in English. That's also one of the things we have been discussing and that we have tested also in Pakistan. What we didn't test so far, but going forward maybe with other programs, audios, interviews, and so on. That's a thing we would like to test further. The gender transformative changes, that's this pilot and also at IMS in general, it's a thing we have had really key focus on, where outcome harvesting has helped us to understand this better and to unpack it, build on practice. What does it actually mean to address root causes in different contexts, where outcome harvesting has been bringing in this practice into the more theoretical understanding of gender transformative changes. Then, as Waqas said, the negative outcomes, that is really of key importance when addressing patriarchal power systems, because there will be a pushback. But negative outcomes that can be difficult to engage people on. Of course, you have to create these brave spaces, but calling it side effects, where we really want to credit Sus from Dignity that started calling it side effects, that maybe open up for a better discussion that don't focus on negative as such, but it's more side effects. It's despite your best intention. Where we are now, as Waqas also said, is to test this with the meaningful participation, and that the process and the findings are useful to the owners of the results, to the partners. The principles of outcome harvesting, this is also just a reminder to everyone. I guess all have seen this slide. Then it's like what to tweak having a feminist lens. Of course, this with calling it owners of results. And on the thing about nurturing participation, that it's the partners and the owners of result that really decide what is appropriate participation, that also going forward with feminist M&E and localized M&E, there's this risk that participation, it gets like a tick the box exercise, the more the better. And what we really also want to test and encourage with this learning is that it has to mean meaningful participation. Sometimes you also have to test with the partners, for example, as Waqas said, with the M&E questions, like how much do the partners want to be engaged? How much can you kind of prompt it? Of course, the gender transformative and social change outcomes, and then with the ensure credible enough outcomes, again, really discuss with the owners of the results what is credible enough. Then, yeah, on the learning and kind of wrap up, like what could the pitfall and challenges be with using outcome harvesting as a feminist M&E approach? Of course, outcome harvesting is partly developed as a Western concept, like most other program development and M&E tools. And that is something we, of course, have to be aware of. And what we are trying now is to make it more localized by engaging local partners and affiliates in Pakistan. What we really also want to do is to avoid making M&E a highly technical exercise. We have been building capacities of the partners, but really in close dialogue with them. What do they see as capacities they need? Maybe there's no need to roll out the whole approach with introduction thoroughly to all 6 steps, but what is really useful for them. And also our partners are smaller NGOs where they don't have a dedicated M&E staff. So really be careful with this rolling out a big approach, but more take what is meaningful. And here we feel that outcome harvesting is very well suited because you can scale it, and the key is really this engagement on formulating the outcomes, the results. Going forward, what we will really also test and wrap up on is this with how to balance outcome harvesting as an innovative method with donor requirements, because of course we should also help partners with this translating, bridging role that in the Pakistan program, it's Danida and support from Norway, which are flexible donors focusing on result-based management, but quite a lot of our programs also have EU funding where there are other requirements. Being careful not to push and create engagement from partners on a certain method that will then be difficult for them to apply in practice with the donor requirement. There's probably a lot more challenges But what we really also want to focus on is that feminism entails a practice of criticism and continue to unpack methods. Yeah, so this was kind of wrap up on where we see outcome harvesting being tweaked as a feminist and localized M&E method, what this feminist lens would entail. We will do a learning product sharing all our findings from this pilot project. It will be shared at the Fabo Learning site, and we would also, of course, be happy to share the actual product, the learning page through this the outcome harvesting community.
Great. Thanks a lot, Helena. Very nice. A lot of food for thought about how we can make outcome harvesting more localized and feminist. So we're curious also to hear your input on this, your feedback, reflections. So you're welcome to turn your camera on if you like. You can either raise your Zoom hand, pose a question, or put your question in the chat so we can have a discussion on this. And while you think about your question, let me just kick off with one here. So Helene Waqas, I think it's very interesting one point where you say to value diverse voices over well-formulated outcome descriptions in English, something I find hard to strike the good balance in, because indeed sometimes you see like, okay, this is because of language that somebody can't get further in formulating it. But on the other hand, you also don't want to give a message it's okay to have half formulated outcomes. So to find a good balance, I find is a very difficult one. And I think there's many things that we can do to do that, because what I often see is that there's also not too much invested always in translation, etc. as well. So it's always best if people are not very fluent in English, because it's really about, putting the outcome right. So in that sense, language is important, but to really invest also in translation so people can formulate in their own language in which they feel comfortable. That's one thing, but also sometimes I think we can still have more local consultants speaking different languages for outcome harvesting. So we have to find more of them, because sometimes when we have them, they also disappear and take on another job. So it's hard to keep them, and also to have that learning space for local consultants. So I would like local consultants also to work with me, but sometimes clients also have to be, have to say, like, okay, we allow for a learning space to have a consultant on board that's maybe not yet fully experienced, but can learn the method while doing. So it's just some thoughts. Okay, let's see what you think. So any questions, reflections, or any experience from your side, how to make it more localized and feminist? I see Irene. Go ahead.
Thank you so much to the presenters, though that was a very interesting presentation. So thanks a lot. So I have a question. For it to be outcome harvesting, one has to cover all the stages. When now we are talking about localization, and in the challenges that have been presented, we say that we could leave out some stages. And my question was, will this still be outcome harvesting? And what are some of these stages that we can leave out and still come out with a reasonable harvest or a useful harvest? Thank you. Sorry, I can't turn off my camera. It's raining and I'm in a very weird space.
No worries, Irene, but good to hear you. Okay, Helena or Waqas, who would like to respond?
Yes, so our initial goal was to not leave any stages out, but really to break them into maybe two legs, so that instead of doing the harvest, in one go, sort of breaking it into a few phases, you can say, or like, sort of doing it piecemeal. So we try to make sure that we do not skip any stage. but we do this at our own pace so that partners can also learn by doing. And that's also because we wanted, them to build their capacity so that if they were on their own or if they were implementing a project where they have to do monitoring and evaluation and they want to use outcome harvesting, they would have at least some internal capacity to do that. And obviously, hiring an external evaluator facilitator can help, but they would also at least know the ropes of the method. So we haven't skipped any stage at the moment. Maybe Helene can add to this because at IMS, what we do is we use outcome harvesting as a monitoring tool and not purely for evaluation. And so in with that qualification, what we do is we then don't have perhaps as strict substantiation as we would as if we were using it as for evaluation.
Yeah, it was specifically this step 4 on learning that when it's monitoring and especially with engagement of the partners, it's up to them also to define how and if this should be done. And it's also here where I think there's a big difference between an evaluation and using outcome harvesting for monitoring.
Yeah, indeed. So substantiation may in that case not be needed or not as much as if it was an external evaluation. Maria.
Thank you so much. Great presentation. Really enjoyed that. So thinking about also the question that was put there on power relations and how you manage some of those, I have two questions on, and probably this is more reflection rather than focalized on this project. Like, how are you thinking about accessibility with regards to literacy? So I imagine most of the people had literacy, so therefore some of the suggestions that Hugh has already suggested in terms of translation, the local languages are applicable, but actually writing it, are you thinking about other kind of methodologies? For example, I heard mention something about using videos or really so that it's actually much more localized and more culturally sensitive to the ways people and communities work that sometimes is not in written form. So I was thinking if you had some reflections on that. And also with regards to that on intersectionality. So I know probably it was quite focused because it was with journalists and certain realm of action. But I guess that if you start looking at it from an intersectionality lens, then there are other things that intersect there that are quite important. So I'm wondering things with regards to age, what does that mean with people and reaching out to the people that may have more barriers when you look at gender and all these intersectionalities to actually make it a participatory. So then you don't end up having the voice, yes, of women, but of a niche group of women that perhaps is not in its entirety representative either of a community or a given location. So I thought perhaps you have some issues, ideas around that, and that relates really a lot of how you deal with those kind of power dynamics, because the more you explore intersectionalities in a community, of course, how the power dynamics operate are going to be much, kind of more difficult to navigate. So yeah, probably it's more for reflection because I know the project was quite focused, but you might have things or ideas to share, and I would be keen to hear some of that. Thank you so much. Really great presentation.
Thank you so much, Maria. So I completely agree in terms of literacy because we were dealing with development sector organizations as partners and then journalists who work in the media. So I feel it's already a privileged sector because, it's more intellectual. Their language capabilities are perhaps, much more improved than if you are working with maybe grassroots community organizations. But just by design, all of the work that we do is bilingual. So we use the national language, at least one national language, as the primary form for instruction, for communication, for correspondence. But then also, people who work in the development sector in the media in Pakistan have English skills. But with one of our participants who was a local language journalist, we encouraged her to formulate the outcomes in the local language. And that really helped her because she was able to articulate herself better. And so we feel that, using local languages and using, more creative, innovative tools, such as videos maybe, or even audio, could be beneficial. And in terms of intersectionality, it did come up in our in our pilot project, even though it was a sort of controlled experiment, because we have like long-standing relationship with our partner organizations as IMS. We've worked with them for over 10 years, each partner, so they know us very well. We know them. Were familiar with the results in the previous years, but we noticed that there was an age played a very important role in how the organizations their internal hierarchies are arranged. So in one organization, for example, the executive director is an older man, and the program staff are young women. And so there is a cultural sort of, I wouldn't say clash, but maybe some, barriers to understanding what the other is saying. And those then can translate into sometimes, negative stereotyping related to gender, sometimes, a lack of agency or decision-making power on the part of partner staff. So what we tried to do was also have these conversations with them around the actual harvest exercise. We would speak with the executive director separately to help them understand the perspective that the program staff might be arriving at this from, and then also giving ample opportunity in the harvest and outside it to the program staff to sort of make themselves heard. And it was also age, class, and the sort of urban rural divide was also brought up in relation to the work of the beneficiary association, because they work with women journalists, and they were very vocal about how a woman journalist in an urban center is affected by our media interventions compared to a woman journalist who is in a periphery region, a remote or rural region where there aren't enough resources, where society is very conservative. Women are not allowed to work in the field to begin with. And so they were very vocal about that they were ready to share this information, but they also wanted us to then do something about it in future program design so that it's not exploitative and then we don't disappear. And we hope to add these points of intersection in the learning product, the learning resource that we are developing. Thank you.
Great. We're looking forward to that.
Yeah, maybe just to add, I think it's very important this with the trust with the partners, and we have also talked about this, me and Waqas, that Waqas is there on the ground, speak the language, understand the reality of the partners, and that is really needed. This trust and yeah, trust building in order to facilitate such a workshop. This with having a separate session without the management, without them seeing it as a threat, it really takes something, and that is really difficult if you come in as a consultant doing an evaluation. So this is really of key importance.
Great, yes. And so you mentioned brave spaces. There's a question from Nola asking, can you elaborate more on those brave spaces? Any recommendations for creating, facilitating brave spaces?
Yes, absolutely. So this was an idea that was originally shared by us by Clara Di Salvo, formerly of Frida and Phenomenal Funds, whom we spoke to as an expert on feminist MEL. And we told her about the conversations that we were having with our partners and beneficiaries. And she recommended that we explore this concept of brave spaces, where it's really about creating an environment or a setting where everybody is open to gaining knowledge and understanding and not being offended by what's being said, or not sort of taking it in a personally defensive manner, but rather having a constructive approach to listening actively, and then trying to figure out what this means for adaptive management, for the future of our work, and for sort of meaningful impact related to that. So we only had some limited opportunities to really exercise this, but what we did was is to work in small breakout groups, where at first the participants would be comfortable in terms of who their group members are, so that they can, for example, say what they want to say. So I'll give you an example. In Among our harvest participants were also some interns who were working at the partner organizations as part of the program staff. And these were young women who had only a few months ago joined the organization, but were now sort of, sufficiently well versed in program activities for us to include them in the harvest workshop. But when they were at a table or in a group where there were senior program staff members present, they would, even when they had very valid or interesting inputs, they would be a little shy or be a little hesitant in airing their opinions or expressing them. But when we put them together in a breakout group, where it was two interns and maybe a junior staff member, they were much more frank and candid and open because they feared, they had a less of a fear of judgment. But then those observations, we could then pick them and then bring them into the plenary and into, with the larger group of participants, where we could perhaps be a spokesperson. So as a facilitator, that's what we tried, is getting some of those comments and then maybe allowing them not to feel like put on the spot. So that's something we tried. And then gradually from there, we tried to build enough confidence in them that they could, be open to sharing with the entire group. And we also noticed this in terms of sometimes, the reactions that some senior members would have to perhaps an outcome that was identified, or the level of significance or a contribution for a particular outcome that was formulated. And then we try and have a conversation with them about their reaction. Why, if they're trying to shut it down, why is that? Would they, for example, have a more reasonable response to it? So again, our existing rapport with the group allowed us to manage this better. And we can imagine that, if it's a facilitator who is meeting these participants for the first time, it might be difficult. So we feel there should be a runway for the facilitator as well here, where they can perhaps build trust with the participants before diving into some of these conversations.
Okay, good. And Henrik is asking, you put an equivalent between substantiation and learning. Isn't that difficult? Isn't it two different things? Helene, do you want to respond to that?
Between substantiation and validation and learning. Yes, it is two different things, but we really want if this is not to, as I said, to suggest that we change the concepts and the wordings around outcome harvesting. This is if it is used as a feminist localized approach, then the focus should really be on learning and less on control. So it is really to stress that focus.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thanks. And another question on how, if you can elaborate more or provide examples on how you manage power relations throughout the harvest.
Yeah, so again, we were in a unique position because um, we as IMS, as the sort of donor for these partners, were in a position of power compared to them. So we tried not to unduly exercise that power, and we have also been sort of holding ourselves accountable and reflecting on this, because with IMS and the partners, there is a relationship. They are implementing a program that we have, if not funded, at least directed those funds from our back donors to them. So sometimes when we would approach them and say that we have to do a certain activity related to this IMS pilot project, their first reaction would be how an implementer reacts to a donor, which is to say, yes, we are ready to do this. But then what we try to do with the pilot project is help them distinguish this from their ongoing program implementation, and just be very sort of realistic and frank with us. And yet, obviously, because of that baggage that we had of a donor and a partner relationship, they were in many ways very amenable to us. So now in our learning resource, we're trying to sort of also picture scenarios where that dynamic does not exist. And so how do we play that? But it was, what I'm trying to say, it was convenient for us to manage this power dynamic because we are also external to them. And in some cases, they depend on us for their funding.
And maybe I can just add what we are doing now at the end of the pilot project is to engage a local consultant from Pakistan to have conversations with the partners on meaningful participation, because we really wanted this not to be a tick the box. Outcome harvesting is participatory, and so it is a feminist M&E tool, but really focus on meaningful participation. And we can't go and ask the partners, so was this meaningful to you? Like Waqas just said, probably they would say yes. So we have engaged a local consultant and really have that it's not just one interview, but really spending time with the partners to dig out how was this meaningful, what part were more meaningful than others, so that we going forward can also qualify this test that we did in with the lens of participation, and that it has to be meaningful.
Great. Okay. Just one last question very briefly. It says here, you said that the design at the start was difficult. Can you say a bit more about that? What was difficult? Just very briefly.
Yeah. So it was difficult because this was the first time that partners were um, uh, basically interacting with outcome harvesting and going through the process of designing the harvest. So it was really about giving them examples or samples of how, for example, social actors need to be articulated as part of the design, what kind of uses, can there be for the harvest, and then, in addition to themselves, who could be other users for it. And then finally, when it came to monitoring and evaluation questions, M&E questions, again, the kinds of questions that they were coming up with were very traditional MEL questions that perhaps are more appropriate for a quantitative results framework, where it's about the number of outcomes, for example, rather than thinking about the qualitative nature of them, or for example, how they're contributing to gender transformative changes. And so we shared examples with them, and then we actually had a little back and forth in terms of drafting those M&E questions. Like I said, we sometimes gave them prompts over email, and they would come back to us with a set of questions, and then we were able to then by consensus, distill them to 4 questions. But it was really a process of learning by doing, because it was their first time, and just getting a hang of what would be an appropriate M&E question that can then also help us with interpreting the results later on, or interpreting the outcomes that have been harvested later on.
Yeah. Okay. So we've come to the end of our webinar. I want to make sure we can stop on time. There are a few more questions left, but we will answer them in an email, Helene and Marcus, if that's okay with you. So we will send you the slides and the recording through the forum, and you can also find the responses to these questions there. So that's it for today. It was very interesting. I think there's a lot of more things that we could discuss, so definitely to be continued, I would say. So do also try it out yourself, or those who practicing outcome harvesting, to see what your experiences with this are, and so we continue the discussion. So for now, I want to say thank you very much for participating, and we will definitely have more webinar coming up. So look out for our invitations on that, and see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.